This afternoon's hobby enhancement is Matzo's Mango Beer. This afternoon it's time to look at some recent hobby. We've been getting into Black Seas for a while now actually, and we have some decent number of ships painted up across a few blokes and a few more blokes getting into it. In addition to painting up some lovely third rates, and where's my first rate? Over here, that lovely big fellow over there. I've done a bit of terrain. I did a video recently of those rocks and some other rocks, plenty of rocks. And I did a video a while ago of how to use papercraft buildings, scaling them down to about 3mm scale, which is about the right scale for Black Seas. And to give you an idea of what that scale looks like next to a boat, here's a brig, a fairly common vessel in this era. Yeah, more or less an anchor. I was going to do a jetty, but I've decided against it for this project. And we can put a frigate, also a merchantman sized ship, there alongside that town, and we get a sense of how big the ships are relative to the average house being a similar scale. So what I did, I figured, you start with some rocks and reefs and things like that, but really we wanted some islands, and the original idea was to have these islands as isolated outposts, maybe pirate dens, that sort of thing, not too many buildings on them. So I did use the buildings from Dave Graffam Games. I bought a pack a while ago, and I think his buildings are nominally for a port town. There's a Port Harbour Master's Tower, for example. And I assembled a bunch of them. I ended up using all of them. I didn't think I would, but I found that once I put a few buildings onto the islands, they really needed a few buildings, not just an isolated one or two, in order to pull off the look of being properly habitated. So different types of buildings have a different degree of quality of look of what I'm after, but all of them have a look which is probably more 1600s than 1800s. But that's okay, because these are meant to be places that have been inhabited for a while. They're isolated outposts. They're not going to have the latest in architecture. What I did in the building of these islands, and I always do groups of these things, I never do like a one-off. I think once you get started you probably want to have a set. I did the buildings first, and then I worked out some sketches of roughly how they would sit on a board and roughly where the hills would be. Right, so when I do a set, I always do a few, not very rarely do one of anything, partly because I figure you're going to want a set of whatever it is we're doing, a bit of variety if nothing else. So we have 3 different island options. For materials, I used the trusty Das wood from the local hardware store. The hills are made out of just random chunks of foam, frankly. I just have a whole pile of the stuff of varying degrees of quality, and I figured it was not going to be the top surface anywhere, so I just ripped it into rough chunks and started gluing it with just white wood glue in a very sloppy and rough job, because sometimes you don't want it to be too neat. For some of the hills I started off with like a contour, but then I got out a just a garden variety box cutting knife, a fairly long one, and just hacked and slashed at it till it's roughly the right shape. The cliffs came from just a pre-painted, pre-molded cliff kit, which is on high density foam from a model railway shop. I did think about getting bark chips and doing it that way, but these, they were there. I grabbed them at random one day just to see how they'd work. And they did work. The only issue was trying to make them into a curve. So what I did was break them into random chunks and hack bits off, and I figure the rougher the better because you don't want it to look too neat and tidy. And I glued these onto the board and piled up the foam, whatever quality foam I was using, inside and around these chunks of cliff face. And they've largely done the job. In fact, I'll go around the other side of the board to show you what these cliff face look like. There's one. In fact, if we get a nice angle there, we've got a boat sailing in front of the cliffs. And you can see I've used putty and filler and things in between the sections of rock to basically cover the gaps. I got the idea for this from a channel called Semi Model Brow, which is really good. They've got some great Black Seas terrain. Much better than anything I'm able to produce at the moment. But credit where credit's due. I got the ideas from there and then went and bodged up my own. And the size of the island is quite contained, specifically so it works on a games table. The islands are probably a bit too small, really, for the amount of buildings on them. For if it were, a real-world island that was inhabited. But I'm taking a leaf out of the Flames of War book, where they talk about range being kind of telescoped on a scale. So when it's up close, it's up close, but the distance between rifle range and artillery range is pushed right in order to make the whole thing gameable while still having your toys on the table. So you sacrifice a degree of, I suppose, reality in order to make it look pretty and playable. Once I'd smacked a whole lot of foam chunks down, I got out some gap filler. I just got cheap ones off the shelf at hardware store. I got the pre-mixed ones because I couldn't be stuffed mucking around. I'm very time poor, so these things tend to get slapped together in a hurry. And I got they come with a plastic spatula type thing. I just slop the stuff all over them really thick, so it gets rid of all the texture of the foam. Painted them brown. Painted them brown. Didn't want to go too muddy and dark a brown, so I went for a mid-tone. And then I got plain kind of powder-like flock. You can see texture of it there, the medium green stuff. Slopped a whole lot of white wood glue all over this thing and then sprinkled the flock on over the top. One thing which I found in talking to Andrew, who's kind of made some nice islands as well, an earlier video on those, is you really need to break up the green, because before I put all the bits and pieces on it, it was kind of monocolour. So that's why we have all these bits of shrubbery, which again is just the clump foliage flock that you buy from a model railway shop. But before I put the foliage on, once I'd put the green on, and I left some areas brown because I figured that's where the towns would be, that's where all the people do their walking around, I put the buildings down. Now this is the one which I had the most clear idea of how I wanted the village to look. It's a waterfront thing left in the lee of the wind, the lee of the waves and storm. I did think about putting a little jetty and harbour in there, but at this scale it was going to look a bit naff, so I didn't do that in the end. I think this is the one I did first. I did this one last. The funny thing is, I kind of liked this one the most first. It seemed to encapsulate all the elements I was trying to bring together, like a little village in the lee of a hill. A quick note on installing the trees. I took the bases off the trees that had bases, and I just poked a hole through the crust of putty into the foam, bit of glue on the base of the tree, and just popped it in the hole. You can't see how that actually looks even with zoom, but it's a remarkably satisfying thing to do at the end of the project, because up to that point everything's looking very hypothetical as to what the final appearance might be. But so anyway, that was done. Picked a variety of different trees that I've grabbed from a model railway store. They actually cost me a little bit of money, but I've been accruing them over time, so I didn't really notice. And yeah, you go for the really small ones. And look, you can get dirt cheap trees through the usual dodgy, low price online providers, which I've used in some other projects. In fact, that's where I got these from. These very old and dusty ones were more expensive, and you know, the cheap ones work just fine. But these are expensive ones that I've used on these models. And that's about it, really. I have plans to do an end piece, basically a land section, maybe a 4-foot long section to go up against the edge of the board, taper it so it doesn't have to be against the corners at the end of the board. But having done these islands, I suspect that the end land piece is a, shall we say, longer term project, especially with everything else I've got going on. So that could be a couple of years yet. In the meantime, these islands I think will keep the game looking pretty while we push on with figuring out how to not crash our ships into each other or set ourselves on fire. And on that note, I look forward to using some of these in some of the upcoming games, hopefully another battle report or two online in the next few weeks. Well, that's it for now. Feel free to hit like, subscribe, etc. Send me a comment, keeps the algorithm happy. But for now, it's definitely time to call it a day.